Good morning, everybody. Before we begin the review, I recently launched a Let's Play channel. It's linked on the front page and I'll put a link down below as well. I've already got a full playthrough done and scheduled for the game we're talking about today. But on to the review. Knights of the Old Republic. The name alone will bring Star Wars fans back to the early 2000s with what many regard as the peak of RPGs in the franchise. With the anticipation of Aspire's full-on remake of the first game for PlayStation 5, they've been treating Switch players pretty well, giving us ports of both of the original games. So let's dive right in. Here is my review of Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2 for the Nintendo Switch. The plot here takes place roughly 5 years after the events of KOTOR. You play as the Jedi Exile, someone who was cast out of the Order years before, wandering the galaxy on their own. The Exile awakens aboard a mining facility, only to realize that the Sith, bounty hunters, and more are hot on their trail. They go on a journey to evade their attackers, reconnect with the Force, and figure out why they were exiled in the first place. I find the plot here to be pretty good overall. It continues a lot of plot threads from the first game, tying this new character into that pre-established lore. There's also a lot more care done to fleshing out the backgrounds of many of the recruitable characters. The only downer about the story are the plot holes, a result of it being a rushed project with a lot of content cut out of it to be able to make that release window back in the 2000s. But as we will discuss shortly, that won't be an issue for long. When it comes to gameplay, KOTOR 2 is a 3D RPG with action and turn-based elements to its combat. As you trek through it, you'll explore large planets, fight enemies, and do lots and lots of side missions. Now before getting started, the cheat code mechanic Aspire patched into their KOTOR 1 port is here in KOTOR 2 at launch. Just click the left analog stick 3 times and you can create any item you want, heal up your character, increase game speed, make yourself invincible, or warp to different points of the story, a feature that you're likely going to need to complete the game. More on that later. But the bigger news, the unreleased content will be added in an update later on down the road. So we're going to be getting a huge increase in story bits, lore, and content overall as Aspire promised to restore all of that content that was cut that modders took years to be able to add back in on PC. Now when it comes to progression, KOTOR 2 is pretty much like the original. You travel to different planets that have hubs and large areas filled with a bunch of NPCs that have story and lore related missions for you to go on, along with minigames and shops like the card game Pazaak and Swoop Racing. Now when visiting each planet, you'll have a main story quest to do, but you'll have a load of side content to do as well. The good thing about this is that the long slog of a tutorial that KOTOR 1 had isn't as bad here. While the Peragus mining facility will take you a good few hours to trek through and can feel a little repetitive towards the end, it's nothing like the 5+ hour trek through Taris in the first game to unlock the ability to go someplace else. But long or short, doing the missions in these areas will bring about the unique thing about KOTOR, alignment and choice. As you go through the game, you can use different stats to make decisions. This could be as simple as choosing to help or condemn a civilian in danger, or as large as choosing one faction over another on what the main story of that planet will give you. Doing good deeds and your alignment will go towards the light side of the Force, be a bad person and it'll go towards the dark side. I've always loved this about these games because your alignment can drastically change how people treat you and how story events will change. It may not be as crazy of a change as it was in the first game, but a lot of character interactions and main events will be different between a light side or dark side character. It'll also affect combat a bit, so let's get into that. When you encounter enemies, the game will pause and you can freely swap your party members and set up commands for battle. It isn't quite turn or action based. You have a lot of different types of attacks like normal critical power or flurries with melee weapons, or little passive buffs like Jedi defense to boost the party's resistance. It's very strategic on what you do and when, and the fact that you can pause combat at any time to redo all of your commands and rethink is very useful. Once you fight enough enemies, you can level up, which enhances a lot of different abilities. You have skills to increase like Persuade, Computer, and Repair for speech checks during dialogue, passive abilities like Weapon Proficiency, and Force powers like Healing, Mind Tricks, and Force Lightning. There's a lot you can strategize even in what kind of build you want for your character and party, and that ties into the alignment feature as some armor and powers are limited to the light or dark side characters. This all comes together quite well, though it isn't all that perfect. Anybody who's played KOTOR 2 before, whether it is on PC or Xbox, knows that it's really glitchy. There's a reason I like the warp cheat, because I needed it to be able to complete the game. As you go through story events, the game will sometimes glitch up and skip dialogue, but it will also occasionally loop and crash during story events. The first time this happened was just a random fluke with a loop at the turret segment at the end of the Peragus mining facility. But I found a consistent crashing issue during the Onderon siege. In one particular loading screen, when you're flying the Basilisk to Onderon, it would crash every time I attempted to go into the event. No matter how many times I reloaded my save data, went back to a previous file and redid a bunch of early segments of the game, and deleting and reinstalling the game, it never failed to constantly crash at that one particular moment. That's where the warp cheat comes in. They let you hop to pretty much any story segment with your party as they are. I was able to complete the game only because I used that cheat to warp past the event it crashed at and going to the next. It's a big problem that's worth noting, and many people may not realize it's there because it didn't show up until the 18 to 20 hour point. Yet another example of why I think anyone reviewing a game needs to play through the entire story campaign just in case a problem like this happens towards the end. Speaking of the end, let's talk about content and length. If you mostly focus on the main story, you'll probably get about 25 to 30 hours out of this game. If you want to do all the side content, you're going to get a lot more than that. Plenty of time for $15. Now, presentation. Visually, the game looks identical to the PC version and has a decent amount of detail outside of the more flat background images they used back in the 2000s. But the first issue here is with the cinematic cutscenes. They didn't really do much to these and widen them up for a full screen look. As a result, they look very pixelated and rough, especially when you look at individual models like this one from the Dantooine Defense event or the color disaster from this one. Audio is also a big problem with the cinematics. No matter what you change the audio settings to, they are massively overblown in volume. The audio constantly peaks and distorts, causing a constant shift in volume level on your Switch or TV whenever you go from gameplay to the cinematic. Now with performance, the game tries and successfully runs at 60 FPS for a lot of the game. There are a few droppy areas here and there like the KOTOR 1 port, but it's pretty good overall. The issue with performance? Glitches. Outside of the crashing I mentioned earlier, there are just a lot of little blemish glitches that can add up. Text windows not showing up when they should, models clashing in dialogue sequences, NPCs and party members getting stuck and not following you, the list goes on. They're not a huge deal on their own, but there are just so many of them. That's all I've got to say about that, so let's go into battery life. On the original model, KOTOR 2 gets a range of 3 hours and 2 up to 3 hours and 45. The Nintendo Switch Lite gets a range of 3 hours and 18 up to 4 hours and 16. The Redboxer V2 2019 model gets a range of 5 hours and 53 up to 6 hours and 50. And the OLED model gets a range of 6 hours and 16 up to 7 hours and 18. In conclusion, KOTOR 2 has arrived to the handheld world with the full experience intact, glitches and all. Now on the downside, the cinematics are rough to see and hear, it has crashing issues that require the built-in cheats to bypass, and it's riddled with just a lot of small glitches and issues. And that's something that I really hate. It's a really good RPG in the Star Wars universe, and getting the unreleased content in the future is a great thing for fans. But it's held back by so many little and big glitches that you can run into that Aspyr might need to go back and optimize it a bit further. Reviews to Go rates Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2 for the Nintendo Switch a 6 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching and have a great day.